Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Loyupla. I hope you have did some walking this morning as you're walking across the lawn to get here or the car park. I know it's a little bit chilly. For me, it was a bit cold this morning. But let me see your hands if you've bought your weaving this morning. Can you take it out? Because you're supposed to bring them back today, I think. Oh, yeah. You've forgotten yours. All right. Good. I can see. I saw some they've put them on their hands and some on their bags as well. But it's good. Let's just keep on weaving those. And as we go on to today is our last and our third day. And have you made some friends or new acquaintance? Put your hands up if you have. Good. I hope you remember the names as well, because I'm not good at remembering names, but I can remember your face. And it's also good to all the Wantaks, it's also good to talk in our pidgin and our language is right. Seeing some new friends. I've made some Samoan friends this morning. Yeah, and get to know a little bit more of my ANU colleagues as well. So on that note, before we go on, the power of Pacific Partnership Research Capacity and Policy Building. I just want to reflect a little bit of all that has happened in the last couple of days. As we come to the third and last day of the State of the Pacific 2026, I hope we all have been busy gathering, choosing, and weaving in what we have learned, heard, or shared in the seminars in the last 2 days. Where can we put this into our own spaces to take away at the end of today? Like each strand that is woven into a mat with precise, skillful, and patient hands, let us go into today's session and find where should we start? How can we turn, twist, and continue to weave the ideas, the principles, networking, and the turns as we, leaders in our own rights and families of the Pacific Blue Ocean, consider who, how, when these strands of a Pacific way can be shaped into the kind of the Pacific country we call our home. Without further ado, I would like to call Tala Tala to come up and say a word of prayer as we open our session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Molia, and thank you for reminding us, asking us whether we did some morning walk. In Tonga, it's not good to walk too early in the morning, but I did walk a lot from the living room to the room, so thank you very much. Let us pray. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for your presence, and your presence is in many forms for those of us in the room. For those of us of the Christian faith, your presence is in our Lord Jesus Christ. There are others in the room in which your presence is different. But we thank you for your presence, and that we ask as we weave strands of different colors, of different lengths, of different widths. That is the beauty of your creation. Often it becomes an impediment to us because we like things to be the same, and we fear difference. Let these 3 days open our hearts and our minds that your presence is in difference, and those differences are to be valued, and that we live. We don't just talk about it, but that we fight to maintain those differences because we are different. But we are thankful that we have been gathered here by the university and by organizers of this conference to share ourselves so that we are able to weave and be stronger in the Pacific. We ask that you bless every single one of us as we hear the thoughts and wisdom of others. We ask these things in your name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you. Can we please give a round of applause to the convener and the speakers of this morning?
Clarinda, thank you for your welcome and good morning, everyone. Lovely to see a crowd here at ANU and many people I know watching online. Can I say Yuma in the words of the Ngunnawal people here in Canberra, a greeting. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Canberra, the Ngunnawal people, their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to particularly extend my personal thanks to the Ngunnawal elders who have taught me so much about our history and are walking together with me and with my colleagues in the Australian government on a journey of reconciliation as we acknowledge the past, both good and bad. We have a wonderful session ahead of us this morning and extremely accomplished panellists here today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Elizabeth Peake, Head of the Office of the Pacific in Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And while the Office of the Pacific is situated in our Foreign Ministry, it has a mandate to bring together across government our Pacific engagement. And our Pacific policy is founded on one very important belief, and that is that to have meaningful, successful and rich relationships with our Pacific neighbours requires much more than government. It requires a whole of nation approach. And so I commend the work that you have all been doing over the past 3 days. The engagement of academic institutions are absolutely critical to that whole of nation engagement. And it's important not only to have these academic and research relationships, but the partnerships that we'll be talking about today, community engagement, the business engagement from civil society, engagement from all institutions throughout our nations and how they feed up into government decision making is so critical for success. I'd like to introduce you to our accomplished panellists today. You have already heard some beautiful words this morning from Reverend Dr. Unatea Fonufata. She's the Director of Tupou Tertiary Institute in Tonga and has been an educator for more than 4 decades, as well as taking an extremely active role in civil society. Next to Reverend Dr. Unatea is Dr. Francis Koea Vakautu. Dr. Francis leads the SPC, the Pacific Community Culture for Development team, and this is work across 22 Pacific countries and territories. In addition, she has many other hats that she wears at the same time, including being a cultural and traditional knowledge advisor to the BBNJ, our High Seas Treaty work, to the WIPO Treaty in traditional knowledge, as well as our Oceans, the Pacific Islands Oceans Commissioner based in Palau. Dr. Francis is an educator of more than 3 decades. While her current role is in the SPC, she has held very senior roles in the USP, the University of the South Pacific, as well. So it's perfectly placed to look at connections and partnerships through many different sectors. Next to Dr. Francis is Executive Director Jennifer Kalpokas-Stern. She's the executive director of a really critical initiative, the Balance of Power initiative. You might have been talking about it over the last few days, and I'll let Jennifer talk about it further as we go into our discussion, but it is an initiative that brings to the fore voices across the Pacific, but in particular women's voices, and focus on gender equality in our public domain. Jennifer too has an extremely accomplished career and has worked in government, in civil society and business. She's currently the chairperson of Vanuatu's Bank of the South Pacific. She serves on Vanuatu's Financial Services Committee, but from an Australian government perspective, we were absolutely delighted that Jennifer was working with us in our High Commission in Vanuatu for 12 years and did an absolutely, incredible job. So this is your panellists, and let me hand over to them, and I'll kick off with an inspiration from former Prime Minister Fiame Naomi Matafa. You heard Fiame speak with great power and clarity at the beginning of our State of the Pacific conference. She inspired us, and you might recall that she noted very directly that too often research is produced and celebrated and archived without influencing decision making. And we need to think about the partnerships that can ensure that research has impact and have accountability for that. So I'll first hand to you, Dr. Unatea, and ask, how do you respond to Fiame's exhorting? How do you think that we can, who reads the research? How does it impact on government decision making, and can we do better?
Sorry, I'm used to having one mic and it being passed around. From a person living in Tonga, we are a new democracy. We've only just had more democratic changes in 2010. So it's quite new in terms of thinking that pieces of writing such as policy will influence really decision making. So I agree with what she's saying. Often we do not have the institutions that are in place in more developed democratic systems. For example, to have universities, it is based in Fiji, in Suva, USP, to be able to provide such, kind of policy writing. We are separated, the communities are from that type of information, and we are perhaps in a system that is not recognizing that data is something that is important to consider when you are making decision making, because we are just trying to kind of understand better how to include voices that has not been traditionally part of decision making. So we are just starting to think of that, but I do believe that it is an important focus for knowledge generating institutions such as where we work, to always include our people. And that is the difference for a small institution like TTI, where our whole research framework is based around returning information to our people, so that we gather it ourselves, because we know the protocols for data collection. I was asked once when for someone to come and help us from Australia in the data collection, and I told this person, have you ever gone to the village and collect data where dogs are running around? They will bite you. Let us do the data collection, because we know how to hit those dogs with a stick. I mean, I know it's not good for that in Australia, but then you have your pets in your homes. These dogs are roaming. So that's just an example of we do our data collection, allow us to do that, and we will go back to our own people, because we know Tonga. Because if that Australian came, we would have tried to protect her from the roaming dogs, and also have to do the translation for that person. So why we need to do the double job? We'll do it ourselves, because we know how to handle our pets, and now we know the language.
Thank you, Dr. Unatea. Dr. Francis, you are now at the receiving end of research, a central player in the biggest regional institution, the Pacific Community. Can I ask your perspective on what kind of research really has an impact and can influence when you're sitting in a regional institution and trying to execute the wishes of the members?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. And just wanting to add also to the wisdom that has been shared by my colleague here to my right. As Her Excellency, the Honourable Fiame mentioned, research is extractive, and those of us who are either in or have been in academia are often blinded by it, by our own sense of altruism, or at least in our minds. We're driven by what we believe is the best of intentions and it's going to make a difference. But those are very colonial research lenses that we are trained to sing and dance in. The language is colonial, the framing is colonial, and of course, Linda Tuhiwai-Smith's work and Professor Konaihe Luthaiman, etc., wonderful work that has already been done about contextual research. And that's the gap that we still see. It's over 40 years, it's over 4 decades of incredible rethinking, advocacy, calls for grounded indigenous thinking, frameworks, methodologies, and approaches to research that Dr. Ngutea had alluded to. And still we see our inability to engage in these meaningful ways because of the imbalance of power, because of who's holding the pen, because of who's the authority, because our ways are still sidelined and not seen as complementary knowledge systems. Our epistemologies are marginalized. And so, wonderful piece of work, extremely outdated, by Zurich and Young, 1997, talks about epistemological racism and institutional racism, and the research racism and the work that institutions need to do in order to become impactful, in order to liberate. And we don't yet see that high level of work emerging from our academic institutions. And that's not belittling the wonderful work that is coming out. There's incredible work, but academia speaks to itself. I was in academia for 23 years, and people say, you left as an associate professor. Just one tiny little step to professor. Why did you leave? Well, I left because I realized that we were in our ivory tower. I left because the university and the university system prioritizes ranked journal articles and not local book publications that our people can actually read and use to change the quality of lives in our communities. I left because I realized the development space might give me more hope, that I might be able to touch some lives in more meaningful ways, and it has. mean, I really thought, oh no, I'm going to the dark side. But as a Pacific Islander, in a space with your own people, in a space with enabling partners, having really hard conversations and allowing them to see the inherent racism of the systems that still bind us in our processes. So the work that I lead at SPC, the Culture for Development Program, I should preface by saying SPC is the only regional agency with a culture mandate. So we're the only regional agency with a Culture for Development Program and dedicated staff members, which means the work is huge. And there's so little money put towards it. There's so much lip service and so much rhetoric, even though we know that that's where the biggest difference is going to happen. That's where the doors will open. That's where you can have the sensitive conversations. So to answer your question, the kind of research that we need to see, research projects where the needs have been identified by the community and not by us external so-called experts coming in and saying, we know the kind of research you need to make your lives better. And I was part of that system for so long. Coming from a really good place of really good intentions and just not realizing that I was perpetuating this colonial kind of process, thinking I was the savior, thinking I knew the answers. Just really deep listening. And I hate the word co-design, it's thrown around so much. But just really listening to what the needs are and having the time to listen to how people engage. We talk about Talanoa and Talk Story and Talanga and you name it, all of these methods and frameworks, but still we see the absence of that in development research. And I think the biggest failure, and it's starting to change, so I don't want to paint a totally negative picture, but I think it's starting to change, that we're starting to see the uptake of this. And we're starting to see in development spaces some of that deep listening happening. Within SPC, the work has begun around research and innovation and the recognition that development work, if you're collecting data, it's a form of research. And it's a form of extraction, as our keynote excellency mentioned on, I think in the keynote, I mean, it's a form of extraction. What happens to the data? We're still not talking enough about data sovereignty. We're still not talking enough about who owns the data, the intellectual property behind that. And I think, and I just want to end here because as an academic I could talk, and I'm not going to hog the time, but I just want to say that I think a really critical role that that higher education institutions and our development agencies need to play is helping our member countries develop their own research policies and frameworks, because we don't have the capacity on the ground. So what are the guidelines, the guidelines for ethical engagement in communities, the guidelines for ethical research, requiring that any and all research undertaken on, with, and by is held in some national repository, and it makes a difference. Because sadly, a lot of the incredible theses, the masters, the PhDs, the academic research, only other academics have access to it. And even if our people have access to it, it's not consumable. It's still very much in a language that's foreign to them. So how do we package it? How do we present it? And I think that there's a whole lot of work that still needs to be done in that space. But we are seeing a willingness to engage in the conversations about reframing and rethinking engagement and redefining what research is, as opposed to thinking, well, research is the thing academics do. Actually, civil society's been doing it forever, and they've got incredible repositories of data that could actually help us improve and strengthen development efforts. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Dr. Francis, thank you for your words of wisdom, and can I acknowledge Her Excellency Fiame Naomi Matafa. Your Excellency, we started with your exhortation from your speech at the beginning of this conference, and it was an inspiration. So thank you for speaking so clearly and so honestly to us to think about getting out of the ivory tower as researchers and getting out of our bubble as policymakers and bridging those gaps. And thank you, Dr. Francis, for your thoughtful approach. I want to hand now to Executive Director Jennifer and ask you about your work on balance of power. Dr. Francis, you talked about institutional racism, which is, partly about whose voices can be heard, whose voices are authoritative, whose voices we elevate. And Jennifer, your work is all about this, bringing different voices to the fore. So would you share a little bit about your work and thoughts on ways that we can do that collectively across different sectors? You've had, as I mentioned at the outset, the very helpful vantage point of working across business, civil society, government. Interested in your reflections on your current work, but also more broadly on those connections between different sectors.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak a little bit about the work that Balance of Power does in Vanuatu, Fiji, and Tonga, the Kingdom. So Balance of Power's work focuses predominantly on recognizing and addressing what we might call cultural and social norms that perhaps prohibit women's ability to exercise voice and agency, but in particular around the perception and legitimization of a woman's voice and position or authority to act as a legitimate leader. Balance of Power's overarching, I guess, goal is to increase the number of women represented in our national parliaments in the 3 countries that we work in, but across the region as well. And I think one of the main things that we've come to accept and realize is that in many ways perhaps our actions, so we have a range of different treaties or conventions that each of our countries have signed up to, but they're not necessarily always operationalized or absorbed into the institutions or practiced in the ways that we would like to see. But on the other hand, we see that many things have already shifted, where opportunities and spaces have already been given to women to exercise that authority and to have legitimacy. Her Excellency is a living testament to something that our other Pacific Island nations would like to aspire to. It's based a lot on perceptions and seeing. Our Pacific people, you might write something down and somebody might teach you something, but unless you see it and in action, you won't necessarily believe it. And so representation and elevating the evidence of that legitimacy in the exercise of leadership that women can have and hold spaces in is at the core of what Balance of Power's work is about. And linking that to research, all the research that Balance of Power has participated in, has partnered with institutions like the Tupou Tertiary Institute in Tonga, with the Australian National University, with the University of the South Pacific. They're all purpose-driven researchers. They're not, I guess we start from a political economy analysis of what is the situation, what is the development challenge that we're wanting to address. We don't know enough about it. So we need to design researches that will help us to collect the data to tell us what we need to be able to do. And so I think research with purpose, not research for the sake of producing data that might sit on a shelf somewhere collecting dust, applicable to the context and the countries that we're working in. We've had a lot of, we've heard a lot from, yesterday we had an amazing panel on Melanesian approaches to doing research. And that was rich, like Dr. Francis has alluded to, rich in terms of what the thinking is and how things have shifted in academia. And it's wonderful to see the experiences of the Pacific Islanders that are doing this research this way, but it's still not translating to the way that we're doing it on the ground, perhaps as Dr. Ingotea has said. But the purpose-driven researchers allow us to be able to take that research, take it back into our communities, validate it with the communities who gave us that data, and then ask them, how do you want us to shape this? If this is the development challenge we both identified together, if we're part of the problem, we're part of the solution. So you tell us how you would like us to take this forward. And I might leave it there because I think there's more questions that you'd like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate your insights. I'll go back to Reverend Dr. Unatea. We've had some comments already about what it means to have locally led a research agenda. What does it mean to have deep community development? And I know this is one of Dr. Unatea's specialties, having done an incredible research project on Tonga's attitudes to the world. So I'll hand back to you, Dr. Unatea, for thoughts on locally led research.
Malo, can I have the images up? So I just wanted to share with you, but I was trying to think of how can I Okay, so as you all can see, it's a struggle for me to handle technology. But, wait, oh. So I thought it would be interesting to just show, because the whole idea of thinking about partnership, in Tonga, I thought it would be important to see the word, root word of what some of the meaning in Tongan of partnership, which is kaunga kau. Kau is a root word that comes from belonging to this cover circle. And as you can see, this is where you're supposed to have talanoa, in this kind of sacred covered drinking circle. And you, where? Oh, so these obviously had happened many years ago. It's still happening today. And you can see there are certain people in the cover circle. I think our word for God, or tua, means a being that rules not just in the circle, loto, but also outside, or tua. So our thinking of a being, is based on this idea of who belongs in the circle and who does not belong. And that is a big part of our thinking about partnership. And I think this is just one of the things, if you notice in the images, that a woman is kind of heading the circle. This circle, or what we would call the cover circle or tanoa, if you see it, you will think it looks very democratic. But it's not. You have somebody drinking the kava, and that is the chief, the head of the circle, chief of the circle, what we would call the taumua. Next to them, they have their roles. And at the person who is serving has this atoa. They have different roles. So when you come to the circle, you have to know where you sit. And I think that's one of the things about partnership, locally led, is that when you are outside of that circle, you must come to the circle and have, like I think Dr. Francis was saying, be able to know that perhaps you're not really in the circle, that you need to learn how to behave in that circle, and how do you, because if you kind of rock in and sit next to the taumua, the Tongans will smile at you, but they will not tell you a single thing that is right. Perhaps they will lie to you. I did say that yesterday. If you're an outsider researcher who does not understand that you may not really belong in the circle. And that circle is valued and highly, how do I say it, protected. And I think if you, when you move, even in Tonga, if you move from one village to the other, the different people are in front drinking that kava. So in Tonga, you may have a PhD like me, no use at all in the circle. No use. So I think I like Canberra because I feel like I want to be a lecturer. I feel the PhD means something. Not at home. So, I mean, other than your workplace, but really, you're sitting, I'll be sitting with where the, and I think when you do, there is a role for outside and local partnership. Because when you do come, I mean, for those of us who come overseas, I think we agree, islanders, we have come, we have left that circle. We have come, and Australia and New Zealand, they don't have a circle. We come here and we're a bit lost, because we're used to that kind of thinking, orderly, hierarchical thinking. So when I came to Australia and in the lecture, lost, trying hard to understand what sort of circle is here, and understanding, oh, there's no real circle. You just have to do your own thing. And anyway, when we return, we are a little bit at the edge of that circle. We have 1 foot in the circle and 1 foot out. And I guess that's I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, but that's something that we can use as a bridge for, and that's what I feel in local partnerships with institutions like Balance of Power, like ANU. I do know some of the things that is happening outside the circle, and then be able to articulate to colleagues what is important to us. That you can give us the skills. You don't need to come to Tonga and do the research. You can train and help us build our skills. You can come and help us, because you won't know that circle as best as we. And we will work well with you, but you must value what we think. Because you can see, are there women? Some people say to me, there's no women. That means no women in decision making. But I will tell you then, there are other circles that women have made decision making. It doesn't mean that it's good or bad, but then we will then think, we will value your questions, and that will allow us to make our own conversations about how to move our people forward. So it's about agency, I think. I think just lastly, before, this is kind of like that most extreme cover circle in which you have the appointment of royal cover. This is a royal cover circle, and you can see there is a whole lot of a bigger circle, and that's how pig. It can be with a lot of pork that is being killed, and pigs that have been killed, the traditional kavas that are being brought in here. Her Royal Highness is the toa, is chiefly toa, server of the kava in the middle, and then 2 other kavas. Everyone knows their place. And of course, in the Tongan sense, the King George Tupou V has an elevated position, and that speaks to our culture. I think this is just for your understanding that Talanoa is not necessarily the window of which you as Westerners may see it. That there is a circle, but it most definitely cannot be it's not the kind of circle that you think will circle here and have a nice little chat, because we are all on equal platform. In Tonga, we are hierarchical, and local partnerships, in my opinion, locally led partnerships mean that we on the ground as islanders have the challenge to make sure that our values that lies within that circle is articulated well, and that those who join us have the compassion and humility to work with others who think those values are important. Malo.
Malo. Dr. Unate, can I stay with you to ask one follow-up question? I think you make an excellent point that researchers need to come with humility, asking questions, understanding the circles and where they need to sit in there. Is there a role or a responsibility for those in the circle to be able to explain to those that come how it works, rather than saying nothing, or, as you say, perhaps even going so far as to not disclose any information or lie? Is there a responsibility both ways?
Yes, I think that was my point, that we do have, as local, those of us in the circle, that we do have the responsibility to articulate that as researchers too, to make others who wish to be part of moving our communities forward to be able to understand better. But it is a challenge, Liz, because we are an oral culture, and this, in these esteemed halls is based on written journals that you publish, and that's the kind of tension that Francis was talking about, that our people, you have to explain, you communicate with them differently. And they're not going to read the journal. I can't even read those journals. Those words are high level. But because that is the game at universities. So the whole thing for me is to locally led, is to say to Jennifer when she comes, Jennifer, this is how we will do it in Tonga, because this is how our people understand these things, and we will do it this particular way. We will not have it in the results in a fancy journal. We will go back to our people and we will do a little drama, because they love that. Or we will go onto a Facebook discussion. We have to use what our forum, and for people to understand, who wish to work with us. They may be, I truly acknowledge, it can be very confusing for outsiders, but that's why I was saying they must have the heart to understand those differences. But I think, like what, just finally, just to say for Francis, if we in the islands feel strong enough about our culture, we just say that. And if you're not happy with it, take your research elsewhere. go and do it with somebody else. I mean, that is the end of the day. We have to be strong to say that. Because we cannot just keep on blaming Australia as Australian parents of power, they're not going to give us any money. That's all right. We have survived thousands of years here without that. We'll find a way. We'll survive. But that's the kind of thing we will have to be able to. If it's dialogue not happening, disengage. Well, that's not a very good way of putting it, but that's what I feel. Sometimes we'll have to work in order for us to protect the integrity of that circle.
Thank you, Dr. Unatea. We always admire the strength and clarity of the Tongan people, and I suspect there are a lot of researchers in this room and online that would appreciate that clarity. That if it's not, they don't come with the heart, with the right questions, and not being able to access the true ability to understand the circumstances on the ground, then best to disengage and have someone else who is able to do that more adequately. It's the absolute sovereign right and the strength of the Tongan people to decide that. I'll go back to you, Dr. Francis, and pick up on a couple of ideas that Dr. Ungatea expressed around different ways of communicating the journals. Talked about dance or Facebook engagement. I'm interested in your experience about bringing some of the research down into different modalities, bite-sized pieces, and how that can cut through, not just at community level, but also regional organisations or national governments.
Thank you. I think my sister has shared a lot of important points with such directness, which I absolutely love. Thank you. And Polynesians are known for that, so you know.
We applaud it.
Yes, absolutely. SPC has taught me a certain level of diplomacy that I didn't have in academia, which might be putting my ancestors to shame. I do try, but sometimes I fail, and the native does rear her head too. But I did, before I get to that, I did just want to pick up on, so one of the conversations that began when I was at USP was really around research ethics. And I think that's at the heart of this question. And this is where you see the inherent epistemological and institutional racism, because academia is a Western undertaking, right? The ways of knowing that are privileged, the ways of packaging that information, the ways of celebrating and assessing and evaluating, and the promotion process, all of it is very, very Western and very foreign and alien to indigenous peoples, not just in the Pacific, but elsewhere in the world as well. So if we're thinking about, when I was going to do the PhD and I was given so this is the human ethics form, read it. And you need to get informed consent. And I said, well, I'm not going to the village to talk to, the various tufunga I needed to talk to, the various women I needed to talk to. Once they've given their word and we've had a cultural exchange, that's the bond and partnership. You now want me to tell them, well, here, can you please sign this? Immediately I lose half or more of my group, right? And so when you're doing culturally grounded work, the structures and systems need to change. And so when I did find myself in a position of some authority, leading the research component at the Faculty of Arts, Law and Education, we started thinking about that and saying, well, look, all students and staff going into a particular community really should engage a cultural advisor. All of our donors, and I know we're not allowed to say that anymore, it's not PC, development partners, who come in also need to have some cultural competency engagement, basic understanding. This is our ways of knowing and being in the world. This is how we engage. This is the importance of relationships. I know many of you would be familiar with the body of work around the Va in Samoa and Tongan cultures. And this is what relational space looks like. So if we are interested in doing meaningful engagement or research in the community, we have to have that conversation first. And it's only the absence of humility when the ego and the arrogance comes to the circle that it results in the, oh, so you have now ignored everything that we told you and decided you want to be up there. Okay, so now is when we play and have fun and tell you half-truths and mislead you. But that's not, I think, I just wanted to say that's not the default mode, right? Where generally our people are at the opposite end of the spectrum, far too hospitable and generous for their own good. Because the disservice that's been done to them is we have not explained to them the parameters and risks and dangers of oversharing. And this is where you have the cultural appropriation and the exploitation, etc. And you have communities saying, well, there's no return. There's no access and benefit sharing. And you've got this commercial enterprise that's happening, and it's not just, of course, with Australia, it's globally. So, you have someone who comes in on holiday, falls ill, one of the women says, oh, does the herbal medicine. It's like, ching, dollar signs. Go back home, suddenly you've got a new product in the market, they're making millions of dollars, knowledge sovereignty, return. And so there's different forms of extraction and research, and I think often the more dangerous ones don't happen in these academic or structured circles. It's the ones that happen outside of it because our people are not aware. And that, I think, is a huge challenge, but also opportunity. An opportunity for us working in this space to begin to educate and create that awareness, to ask the right questions. So what are you here for? And Samoans are so good at that. I know this because my grandmother from Samoa, from Nofwali and Samoa, she was my first teacher on censorship and intellectual property. And as a child, I didn't know what that was. And it's only in the work that I do now that I think, oh my God, Mama, the wisdom is there. They don't have the language, the big words, but the wisdom is there. And she would say, okay, I'm going to tell you a story now. This one you can share with other people. Okay, the story I'm telling you now, you can write it down, but this is only for the family. You don't share this with. It's like, oh, but it's such a cool story. No, this one is, no, you're not allowed. And at the time, I didn't, as a child, you don't comprehend these things. And sometimes in these spaces, in academia and in development, I think, oh, I wish she was still alive. I wish my mom was still alive and I could tell them thank you. But this is what it means to be a custodian. This is at the heart of what it means to be the guardians of, and it's temporary. Just a kink, one little piece of chain, and then you hand it over to the next generation. My question would be, the follow-up question would be, how are our institutions contributing to supporting that alternative or different way of knowing and being in the world, rather than that you need to change in order to be meaningful, in order to have any significance or value. It needs to be packaged like this. Actually, no. The Tonga study on there was a sustainable livelihoods project, SLEP, the SLEP project, and it was initiated by a group of Tongans. I think it was around 2005. It should be online. This is when I was still at USP. And it was a very angry reaction to a World Bank statistic that said Tongans live in extreme poverty, surviving on less than $1 per day. And it was the capturing of poverty that really kind of incensed some of the Tongan scholars at the time. And they said, when you unpack that word, poverty, in our language, it does not translate to money. And so they did this incredible research with community, by Tongan scholars themselves, in language, using their own Tongan methodologies and methods, and then, of course, translated. I think that was a NZAID, now MFAT, funded initiative, intended as a pilot to then be replicated in other Pacific countries, but unfortunately that didn't eventuate. But nevertheless, the SLEP project of 2004-05 is a really significant piece of work, because what it then unpacked is what poverty actually meant in the Tongan context, which is definitely not about money. It's about relationships. It's about access to food security. It's about community. It's about relationships at the heart of it. And unpacking it in language made it even that more powerful. So I think that when we think about research informing policy, and when we think about strategic partnerships, it's that willingness for deep listening, to come to the table and say, I know a lot about one thing, but I don't know everything. And unfortunately, a lot of people who come into our backyards don't come with that humility. They do come with either a savior complex or an agenda, an extractive agenda. And that's not to say that we don't get good people, because there's incredible relationships and partnerships that, stand the test of time. And maybe I'll just end with a story. And so probably around 2009, I want to say, there was a group of Europeans who came from Europe, and I got roped in. They said, oh, please, can we come to USP? And we'd like you to talk to them about working in community. And so when they came, they came with these good intentions, and they were going to document these different processes of marine protected areas, indigenous ways of doing this, because they felt that the world had so much to learn from the Pacific. And I said, well, the first thing, you have to realize that our people have been exploited. So they will look at foreigners with deep suspicion. And when I say foreigner, I don't just mean Palangis, I don't just mean, a whiter skin. I mean a Fijian going into the Marshall Islands. A Samoan going into Kiribati or Palau to do this work. We are not of the circle. And so the immediate question is, all right, hang on. Just because you're a Pacific Islander doesn't make you an insider, right? So we had these deep conversations, and I felt that some of them were quite offended, because I said, you need to prepare for the question, what is in this for us? Why should we tell you this? When the missionaries came, we lost so much. When the colonials came, we lost so much. When the researchers come, they come and extract, and they go, and they get their promotions, and they're celebrated, and our children go to school, and they have to quote them. This is our knowledge. What's in this for us? And are you here for one visit? And they said, oh, what does that mean? And I said, in the Pacific, relationships are at the heart of who we are. So if there is no indication that you intend on actually building a relationship, then they may not want to engage with you, or they may just give you like a little bit of surface knowledge, but it won't be a meaningful engagement. And so I could tell that they weren't fully convinced. They probably thought I was a gatekeeper. One of them asked if I wanted to be paid as an advisor. Oh no, talk is free, happy to do this. 3 months later, they were coming back through, and I think they went from Fiji, they went to Tahiti. They did go to Tonga, but because they hadn't followed protocol, I don't think they were able to speak to some of the people they wanted to speak to. Ended back in Fiji, and one of the lead researchers says, oh, Francis, can we go for coffee? And I really, really need to talk to you. I said, okay. She goes, oh my God, they asked verbatim what you had said. We got there, and we did the sevu sevu, which is the kava ceremony, and asking, we request, access to your community, a place to sit and sand and talanoa with you. And they said, oh, what are you here for? And they explained, and, for the good of the world, all of this, it's important to document this. We have so much to learn from you. And they said, well, that's all well and good, but this is going to disrupt our lives. The men will not be able to go to the plantation, they won't be able to fish, the women won't be able to do what they need to do. It's going to disrupt everything in our community. What is in this for us? And do you intend to come back? And is there a long term? And she said, yeah, it was crazy. We kind of thought, maybe she's exaggerating, and she's putting up this barrier so that we can be prepared for the worst. But first community went into, that's exactly what happened. And I think that what was wonderful was the fact that they had reached out early on to say, look, what should we expect? What's the best and the worst that could happen? I feel like too often that doesn't happen. And so I do think that these, when we're talking about these research partnerships and trying to inform our programming or our policy, we really need to pay close attention to our communities, and not just what is said, but what's not being said. And we also need to pay very, very close attention to the ethics of that engagement. Just in relation to policy, I feel that research is underutilized, and there's a heavy tendency to focus on statistics and raw data. And in the absence of qualitative, to make sense of it all, the data means nothing. And unfortunately, that's what gets packaged to frame the narrative of the Pacific. So I'll give you a really simple example, and then I'll hand over. But in Fiji, if you look at most of the global reports about education, they'll give you some ridiculous student-teacher ratio of something like 14. There isn't a single classroom that I have ever walked into Fiji. I'm in my 50s now, early 50s, started as a secondary school teacher, which has less than 40 students. How is it that these global reports say that there's a teacher-student ratio of 14? And what they've done is, they've simply taken the raw data of the total number of students enrolled in a year and the total number of teachers and pitched one against the other. The nuance being that there might be some rural, remote, outer island school that has 5 students or 3 students to a teacher, right? But you come into an urban center, you're lucky if you have 40. There are some schools that have 45, some bursting at the seams at 50. If you're lucky, maybe 15 to 20 in a private school, for example. But I think that's the missing link when it comes to research, is how we actually package and make sense and interpret the statistics and the data, because too often I think the emphasis is on the quantitative without the qualitative to really help make sense of it, to make sense of the context and to apply those blanket sub-regional labels, just generalize in Melanesia, in Polynesia, in Micronesia, when we know that it's far more nuanced than that. Yeah.
Dr. Francis, thank you. So many wise insights in your comments. E.T. Jennifer, can I ask you about influencing one of the toughest institutions in any country, Parliament or political representation? We've talked about regional institutions, educational institutions, engaging with communities and influencing policy, but you are in the most difficult scenario to influence. You're using data, you're using research that we have done for many years on the value of gender equality for our people, for our societies, and translating that into supporting women to get elected. But this is a tough juncture. You're dealing with the people who have the power, and you're seeking, as they may see it, to take it away, at least to some degree. Just thought I would ask your reflections on, of the cut-through arguments that you have, of the cut-through research or data, are they helpful, or are there other ways of influence that you find more impactful?
Thanks, Liz. I think, first of all, I could sit here all day and listen to the two of you. I was kind of hoping, time's going, she's not going to ask me.
Not so fast.
For the work that we have been doing, and I might just use Vanuatu's example because it's what I am closest to, it's the recognition that, so I'll backtrack a bit. The research that was conducted in Vanuatu was on the unspoken rules of politics, voter motivations at election time. And the reason was, like I said before, we've already agreed, our parliaments, our governments have already signed up that, various different conventions. We've got temporary special measures as something that's been institutionalized at our municipal levels. And we've got women who are heading institutions, heading ministries, who are heading overseas missions. Our rhetoric doesn't match our actions. However, when it comes to politics is kind of where that jump between the executive level of governance to political legislative governance is not happening. And we were trying to unpack and understand why is that. And it does really come down to the people, because it's not Parliament that's putting women into Parliament, it's the people. And we wanted to really understand, why do people vote the way that they do? How do our communities make those decisions? Who is influencing the voters to make those decisions? Why? Why do people vote the way that they do? And so I guess rather than, obviously one of the good things about balance of power is that it isn't, it's using a multi-pronged approach. There's work that we're doing with our government institutions at the policy level. There's work that we're doing with the private sector. There's work that we do with the, government institutions, with the Public Service Commission. Some of the work that we're doing with Reverend Ngate and Tonga is around adaptive leadership for public servants. But a big part of that is working kind of under the grain and really understanding what are those socio-cultural, I'd say fasin bluyumi, that make us decide and make decisions that the way that we do, which is perhaps inhibiting our ability to recognize women as legitimate enough to vote for them, to represent us in our democratic institution in Parliament. And it's almost like working from the ground up. We change the way that women are perceived, women's legitimacy is understood. And while, after 45, coming up to 46 years, we've only now got our 7th woman to ever be elected into Parliament. It's not that it can't be done, it's that the rhetoric and the narrative continues to shift so that it isn't a constant. And so we recognize that there are legal things, or that, there's things that the legislature can change or shift, but until and when the people actually believe it themselves. And I want to just touch on the way our research, Dr. Sonia Palmieri from the ANU has been really helpful in supporting the team on the ground, but it was a very locally led, locally driven research. And even the people that conducted the research, Vanuatu is made up of 83 islands which all have different languages. I think Anna talked about it, 136 different languages, which means that's at least 136 different cultures and customs and, circles that each of our, even though Ni Vanuatu researchers were going to go into those communities, were also not a part of those particular circles. And so it was an adaptive approach to the way that we did research, because every time we went to a different community, it was different. On the outset, there was different partnerships that we made sure we had in place. The Department of Women's Affairs, linking it to policy, the National Bureau of Statistics, because they are the custodians of all national data, and they would give us that credibility. An ethics committee, and passing muster for the ANU's ethics, and recognizing that ethics process is an iterative process that changed every time we went. And what are those ethics that we're talking about? It's that mat that you're giving to the chief before you go into the community. It's who has the authority to speak in this space. And so other partnerships then cropped up with the community workers, with youth workers, area administrators, and then community leaders. And so I guess the point, Liz, is that rather than recognizing that, we call it the red roof, because our parliament, thank you, China, built us a lovely big parliament building with a red roof, which is how it's referred to in the communities. While that is the ultimate goal, they're not necessarily the target. So, and I guess, while I have the mic, because I probably won't have it again, I guess just to say that we've been talking and hearing about returning that information back to the community. And I think the team, I'm very proud to be representing them, and they're joining online today. That the three things I know that our research coordinator, Vani Naidlumu, always talks about is respect, reciprocity, and relationships. And that just underpinned everything that they did. And Vani herself talks about her positionality as a Fijian woman who goes into those communities to collect data. She won't. And she says, I wear my suluira because I'm going into the village, and that's what positions me as the outsider. I'm the Fijian that's coming into your village in Vanuatu to ask you to share. But the process of the research and the data collection itself, after we had collected all this data, we took it back to the heads of those communities and had like a data validation workshop. We asked them to validate, is this exactly what you said? Because we had to conduct those researches in Bislama, not in English, and we knew that if we wrote it down, parts of it might be lost in translation. So it was very important to come back and say, is this what you said? Is this what this means? Once we launched it, so we did the Deputy High Commissioner came and launched it with our Minister of Justice and did all of the proper protocols. But then now it's like, for research, what was the purpose of that research? Sure, the Department of Women's Affairs are going to tick a box and say we've done this part of the policy. But we really wanted that research to inform our work, to say to the communities who gave us their research, now you know, so will you now vote for a woman? Because you already told us. You have already legitimized a woman's authority and her ability to lead. So we are taking that research back, and as we speak today here in Australia, the team is in Santo in Vanuatu, and they're using the findings of the research to now inform the civic education. So there's civic education has been introduced just this year into senior levels of high school, and so they're being asked to now go around the major high schools to share the findings of the data as part of that civic education for senior cycle students. But socializing that research back into those communities means that we've actually engaged them to come back and say, here it is, here are the findings, you're from here. You've identified that this is an actual issue. Now you tell us how you want to address this, because the next elections are 2 years down the line. If you want to see something change, we're not going to tell you, but we're bringing you your data. Now you have to tell us in the way that you think is the most appropriate way to then socialize this back so that you can do something about it. And then the assumption is we've created enough of a movement and an understanding so that when election time comes, more people will vote for women, but that's only if women stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. We are back to passing the mics. Thanks, Jennifer. Really incredibly thoughtful approach that you're taking. In that, so many lessons for all of us in terms of where the impact can lie and the lessons. You foreshadowed that I would not come back to you, but I'm going to. We are running out of time, but I wanted to offer our panellists a sort of final thought. What would be your pearl of wisdom, if you were to sum it up, for effective partnerships? You're looking very sage, Dr. Ongatea. I'm going to pass the microphone down to you to start.
Effective partnerships. I don't have any words of, you were saying pearl of something. of wisdom. But I think effective partnership is that the two come together like to shake hands on equal ground with the same heart to be able to support each other, move something forward. That's my thinking about it. And that it is never easy. Because I mean, my husband and I shook our hands to stay together. It's not easy. I sometimes want to kick him, but we have shook hands and pledged before God to try it out. I think that's just the idea. We try it out again and it will go downhill, but hopefully we continue to keep going in the hope that something good will happen.